Okay, great. Welcome to the Yoga PTG for Cinder. So we'll have 4 action-packed days, as you can see from the schedule. Um, and this should be kind of exciting. And hopefully this next time we do this will be in person, although one never knows. Okay, so some general announcements. I guess, does everybody know where the Etherpad is? So let me give you well, actually, let me do something better than that. Where's the comments? You'd think I'd know how to use this thing by now, but the comment window has like disappeared. Um, Maybe you can see the Etherpad URL from the screen share. So it's etherpad.opendev.org/p/yoga-ptg-cinder. Um, the other place to go to find stuff is just, and this one's easier to remember, ptg.opendev.org. And then that'll take you to the main PTG page, and you can find the list of Etherpads from there, which would give you ours and everybody else. And then also there's the currently at the PTG page, and it has like a schedule about halfway down with which teams are meeting. And the link to this Blue Jeans chat, in case you lose it, is there. If you click on the lozenge that says Cinder, that should open you up in Blue Jeans. And I've also got IRC open, so right, just shout in the Cinder channel if you get lost and can't find what we're talking about. If you lose track of the Etherpad, we got a lot of stuff going on, so that happens. Okay, if you haven't registered yet, please do it. The foundation's just trying to keep track of the numbers of participation at the PTG. It's free. I don't think you get spammed. So the link is on the Etherpad. And I should scroll this up so you can see it. Okay, is that visible, or is it too small, or is everyone just looking at the Etherpad and not actually looking at the screen share? Okay, Chuck says it's good, so I'm okay with that. I suggest that you open the Etherpad separately in a different window because we're going to use it to take notes, and you'll want to do that. And you may want to, you can adjust your display in Blue Jeans so you don't see the screen share at all. So if somebody shares something that you want people to see, make sure you point that out. Otherwise, I think most people will keep the screen share off just so you can see all the other smiling faces of our participants. Okay, we're bound by the code of conduct from the foundation, so there's a link here if you haven't read it. We do stuff all the time, and you all are good people, so I'm not worried about that. But in case you're curious about what the code of conduct is, you can follow the link. There's a Etherpad for feedback about the PTG in general. If you have comments about any aspect of it for the staff running the PTG, there's a link there. Okay, as I mentioned, to just find stuff, go to ptg.opendev.org and you can find everything from there. I want to point out we're having happy hour Wednesday at 1600 UTC, so the end of the day tomorrow. Simon's going to lead the discussion about naming our mascot and our team or possibly. So that'll happen there. We're going to do that in MeetPad because MeetPad, we don't need to record the happy hour, and MeetPad allows you to see more people at once. And I'll take the team photo there, just a screenshot out of MeetPad. So if you want to be in the team photo, please attend the happy hour. Okay, and then also there's a V-Social event for the entire PTG, if you're interested. I put the link on the Etherpad. So Thursday at the end of this set of sessions, so it's 1700 UTC, there's a virtual escape room. So you have to sign up and get a ticket in advance. They're going to break up into teams of like 5 or 6 people, and then you have some kind of escape room challenge to escape from. So if you're interested in that, please sign up for a ticket so they can organize, and you need to sign up for the ticket before 2300 UTC on Wednesday. And there's a link in the Etherpad if you want to try that out. It's sponsored by RDO. Looks like it could be a lot of fun. Okay, I think that's all the announcements I've got right now. I probably missed something, but it'll come up later. Okay. So just how we work, in case you haven't been here before and done this, the sessions are recorded, so you can always go back. Jay will post them in the Cinder YouTube channel, where you can find recordings going back to, I don't know, Pike or something, maybe Mitaka, probably even earlier. Anyway,
Yeah,
there's like
we've been
lots of
doing it a long time.
there's a lot of stuff there, so you can go back and look if you want to dig into Cinder's ancient history and see how exciting things used to be. There's oh yeah,
I
so
think
I'd
you
like you
can.
please sign in on the attendees part of the Etherpad. You'll notice it gives you a random color. You can adjust if you want to, but that way we can sort of track the discussions easily. Let's see, all the notes and questions and things, please do them in the Etherpad. There's a chat in BlueJeans, but that isn't preserved, so don't use it. Unless you want to raise your hand or make some kind of snide comment, which nobody wants to do. That, isn't part of the actual PTG. So notes and questions, just slap them into the Etherpad. It's a collaborative document, and that's what we're doing. So even if you're not talking, if you have a question or if you want to flag something to come back to, go ahead and just take a note there. And it's helpful to preface your comment with your IRC, Nick, just so we know who was raising the question if we want to go back and discuss it the next day or something. Okay, and then yeah, and so here's a chance for you to actually write some stuff in the Etherpad. I noticed a lot of the other teams are doing retrospectives, and I didn't schedule any time for a Xena retrospective for Cinder. Because I didn't think of it. And also because I tried to overdo this, like I guess the first time I was ETL, and put together these big forums where people could give comments and then we could discuss them, and nobody did it. So that kind of didn't work. So I'm not against doing a retrospective. We could just do a freeform thing, or we could do something, that's a little more guided, or we could do nothing. So I'm sort of open to suggestions. So you got the Etherpad there, so just go ahead and add comments. We do have a little bit of time. I scheduled some buffer time in between the Glance and Nova sessions on Thursday. So we could use that, or we could steal a little bit of time from the volume driver API participatory activity we'll be doing. So I'm not against a retrospective, but I also don't want to just have us all sitting here looking at each other in BlueJeans and not retrospecting. So whatever the team wants to do, I'm cool with that. So please put in some comments and we can do that. And that's all I got for announcements. Now it just so happens that the user, I should pause for a minute. Does anyone else have an announcement or something I forgot or something they'd like to bring to people's attention? I see Gorka's got bright red. Yeah, it's true. Right. So, right. Good point, Gorka. So you don't have to comment only in the Etherpad. Please feel free to speak up during the discussions. That's also why we're doing this in video, so we can all talk. So thanks, Gorka. All right, anything else? I guess that's pretty much it. All right, so don't forget the happy hour tomorrow, end of the day, and we'll be doing team photo then, so make sure you have it on your calendar. Okay. All right, so the user survey results just came out like the end of last week, I think. So I slapped them into an EtherCalc. Now, when you open this thing, the first time I opened it, there's a lot of data in here. So be patient. It may take a minute to load in your browser because it'll do its Ajax magic. And if we all open this at once, we may crash the EtherCalc. So, but that's kind of beyond what we can do. So go ahead and open that up. And I guess I'll open it up here too. wasn't bad. All right, what I did with this thing, where did it open it up? All right, so the thing I got from the foundation was basically what's the first page here. So it's just a bunch of questions, and I don't know, it's like 50 columns and 500 rows. So I split it up into pages for stuff that I thought we might be interested in. So you can see those on the bottom. So there's some general things like upgrading. So I didn't actually look at the survey this time, but some of these are multiple choice questions. So that's why if you look at this page, I just sorted it so we could get a rough idea of how people are doing things. But you'll notice the most common answer for how do you upgrade is we don't. Although there's a lot of fast forward releases too. And
So, and there is a Cinder section there, Cinder section there, which is Cinder specific.
Yeah, so if you go down, there's Cinder, we asked the kind of question. All right, let's skip right to the Cinder stuff, and then we can look at the other stuff later. Okay, so if we go to Cinder, so what I did was I just compacted the answers here. So what we asked, so sort of two things I want to do here. One is to go quickly through what kind of feedback we got from the user community. And then the other thing is, do we want to use the same question on the next survey, or do we want to modify it? So that's why there's some other tabs for Manila and Nova, just to see what some other teams asked, to see if we want to do that too. All right, so basically I don't have any like agenda or
I don't know that
organized thing here. So if you just want to just look through, if there's one thing you'd like to see changed, added, removed, or fixed in Cinder, what would it be? Would you sort of look through to see what kind of... So we only got 41 responses. I think the overall thing was like 450, somewhere in there.
Well, that sounds like everyone's either not using us or happy with it.
Yeah, so as the usage... Right, the usage... I didn't see the usage on this one. The last time I looked, we've got like 88% of people who deploy OpenStack deploy Cinder.
I'd love to know which of those 88% actually don't use LVM and use an external Cinder driver. That's what I'd like to know.
Yeah. Well, so we can ask that. So you saw Manila did ask specifically, what driver do you use? So we could ask that. I don't know what our constraints are on, I mean, like Manila had 3 or 4 questions. So I'm assuming we could do that too, if we wanted to. Or we could at least have 2 questions, right, without stretching it too far. So we could ask specific, specific driver questions. And we could ask it just in the general way that you asked Simon, just are you using, an external driver, or we could ask specifically for what driver they're using.
That might be more, I mean, some people may use more than one driver. So I think just asking who's using external drivers and not LVM. I mean, first of all, I'd like to know is who's using external arrays, external drivers like NetApp and Pure and Hitachi. I'm not bothered so much about who's using Ceph, because I assume that if they're using one of the external drivers, it's going to be Ceph that they're using instead. So that's what I'd like to know. I'd like to know the percentage that is everything else compared to Ceph.
Okay. Let's see. So yeah, in the Etherpad, we can go ahead and try to frame a question that would get the information we're trying to ask. Um, and there are a couple people asking about Ceph iSCSI, which we now support. So
There's a few things in there that people obviously haven't seen the latest features or really understand OpenStack. I mean, line 9, we want shared storage disk. I know that's called Manila.
yeah, I guess I don't know that the question asked what version of OpenStack you're running right now.
Yeah.
At least
I
it
mean,
wasn't on.
line 16, Cinder volume HA, it exists. You know.
Yeah, so I guess, and they didn't say whether they'd like it added, removed, or fixed. So they might not be asking for the feature. They might have something else in mind.
One question, Brian. Are we going to do like last year where we gave kind of responses to the different points? I don't know if it was useful to any of them. As in, for example, when they say, like Simon said, the line 9 share storage disk, we can refer them to multi-attach and we can refer them to Manila, saying, depending on what you want to do, we have it here, you have it there, it's there, please check it out.
We could do that. There was a discussion I went to yesterday about people are having trouble figuring out how to communicate with operators. And it partly because the OpenStack, right? OpenStack went to the OpenStack discuss list because we didn't want to have this barrier between the developers and the operators. So instead of each person having their list, but what's happened is if you subscribe to OpenStack discuss, you get a zillion messages. And if you're an operator, you probably are interested in like 1% of those. So that's a whole separate thing. So actually, I should mention that. So Amy Marich is the coordinator for the some kind of user group of operators that used to run get-togethers, but haven't been, of course, over the past 18 months. But she said she gets a lot of good responses when she tweets, that operators seem to pay attention to whatever hashtag she's got for tweeting. So if you want to get a message to operators, the thing to do is post it to the email list and then tell her what the URL is at the OpenStack discuss, and then she'll tweet it out. So just something to keep in mind, because every so often we'd say we want to get some feedback from operators. So just as a reminder, because I'm going to forget this, we need to make sure Amy's in the loop so she'll tweet it out. But anyway, so I'm just bringing that up. So we could go ahead and write up a response. I remember just talking about it. I hope I didn't like take an action item and then not do it. But I don't remember. I have a vague memory.
I think you actually did it. If I'm not mistaken, there was actually I don't know if it was a document, blog post, or something where we actually or a Etherpad, I don't know what it was, but there was somewhere where we were given responses to the different points. So mostly the ones we understood what they wanted, not the generic ones where we don't even know what they're asking for. But the other ones we did something like that, like we have shared storage via Manila or using multi-attach. It was added in this release, blah blah.
All right, I think that's a good idea, and it's good operator relations too, to just, because we can, and not, like you just said, we can answer some questions and then just say, we got some general comments that we're not quite clear on if you want to elaborate, start a discussion or something. So I think that would be good. All right, so I will take an action item to slap together an Etherpad or something to get this started, and then we can collaborate on that.
I love line 37. Isn't that the whole definition of what this project is?
Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe they thought the question is, what is Cinder?
How anonymous was this survey? Is there any way we can find out who asked these questions?
Well, you can, if you go to the main one, you can sort of correlate the rows. I compressed it just so we didn't have all that space. So you can sort of figure out what else these people have said and get a sense. I'm wondering whether they mean they would like the Cinder volume service to be able to handle multiple drivers. But again, we don't know what they're actually asking here.
But what do you mean multiple drivers? It can actually do it, right?
Yeah, it can.
Yes.
And you
So
can
what am I
even
saying?
you can even write your own plugins outside of Cinder and make Cinder use them.
Yeah. I don't know.
And yeah, line 29 as well, EMC driver. Well, I thought we had drivers for every possible Dell EMC storage out there, so I don't know what they mean.
That was going to be my response too. It's like the EMC has lots of drivers.
Yes. Every
Maybe
platform they sell.
They may want the old school EMC non-Dell driver.
Oh yeah. Surprisingly, the Dell EMC one works on the old EMC boxes. Wow. It just makes you wonder who replies to these and what they're doing when they actually reply.
Well, some of these might be the 12% who don't use Cinder. Okay.
It would be nice that we had that adoption rate number, though. They seem to have stopped doing it. I think that was back in 2018 or something. They asked that question. And we just don't know how it's changed from then.
I'm sorry, which question was that?
Do you use Cinder?
Oh.
Which projects do you use? That would be I don't think they ask that question anymore. And if they do, the results are not available to us.
Yeah, I had to, for the last time I do a presentation on this, I had to sort of screen scrape. So they have this tiny little graph and you sort of have to guess. So it's got all the possible OpenStack projects and there's a little
yeah,
for each one.
That is really terrible. There's too much data in that.
So some feedback for the survey team. I guess let me get to sorry, I'm saying this in Etherpad. Okay.
Thanks for making the data more readable, at least.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's hard to deal with otherwise. And actually, it wasn't so bad in EtherCalc. I downloaded it as a CSV and then put it in LibreOffice, and it was I couldn't read anything. It was just a mess.
Yeah.
And then when I uploaded it to EtherCalc, it was easier to actually, because all the columns were compressed and you couldn't read anything. And then, well, anyway. All right, so we need feedback to the survey. All right, so one thing we'd like is what else were we saying?
I seem to remember a few years ago, they had a web browser, a web page for the results of the GUI, and you could pick all the data you wanted and create your own results. That seems to have gone by the by, which is a shame because that was really useful to us.
Okay.
And maybe because they were asking more questions and more detailed questions. I don't know. It seems to me the survey doesn't seem as comprehensive as it used to be.
Okay. Or they're not publicizing where the data is available.
Yeah.
All right. And then, so for the next survey starting up soon, do we want to modify this question? So Simon suggests adding what drivers are you using for your Cinder environment? That seems pretty straightforward. Do we want to ask this one again or try to, I guess we don't have to come to a conclusion at this minute. But what's the general feeling? We don't seem to be getting exactly what we want from this.
Yeah, I mean,
or maybe we are, I don't know.
I mean, the existing question is pretty broad, and so obviously we're getting all kinds of stuff back. So the question is, I think the what driver are you using is very interesting. Then maybe a more targeted question on improvement or something like that, rather than just what do you think?
Yeah. What feature is missing that you would like? Something like that.
Okay, so instead of
I was going to say that in terms of they saying what they want, they are saying it. They are just being too brief about it. So maybe we should somehow stay in the question, because this could be potentially things that we can do, things that we can improve. But if they are so brief that we don't understand what they actually want, it's hard for us to take any action. So maybe somehow express it, that they have to be very clear about what they are looking for so that we can take action. And maybe give some examples, I don't know, or link to a page where from the questions where we give good examples, bad examples of answering this kind of questions, because lightweight virtualization in Cinder, I don't even know what they mean.
Yeah.
But other things, for example, line 4 is very clear. OpenStack client support. They want full support in the OpenStack client. That is clear enough. Cinder backup improvements. Which ones? There are a bunch of things we can do.
Right.
But in others, they are more clear because they want a scheduled volume backups. That is clear enough, the idea they want. So we need somehow to get people to give enough information. And I don't know what's the best way to do that.
I'll ask the survey team. I mean, because maybe they'll have some ideas. Okay, we're sort of running 3 minutes late. Any other, anyway, this is there, so feel free to look at it later. We can always revisit it at some point, and we can always discuss during the meetings. Yeah. Okay. Any general observations, comments, or anything? All right, so something to look at to get a sense of roughly what people want. All right, so I've got the action item to try to get a discussion. I mean, a response to the operators list and get some discussion going, hopefully. All right, thanks.
Brian, I don't know if I'm looking at it correctly. Where is your action item? I'm looking at the Etherpad.
Oh, line 94.
Oh, to do. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, and somebody hopefully wrote that in for me. Okay, Josephine, I think I saw you arrive. Oh, we got 27 people. Yeah, that's pretty nice. All right, so people who arrived late, this is being recorded, so just be aware of that. And please use the Etherpad. If you have any questions, feel free to shout them out. And, what else I'm trying to say? Okay, Josephine, are you here? Pretty sure
I'm
she
here.
was.
Can you hear me?
I can. Great. I'm going to go on mute and let you take over and talk about the in-flight encryption update. Thanks.
Okay. I wanted to give a short update about the in-flight image encryption we're trying to contribute. And currently, or for the last year, we were waiting for the Barbican team to implement microversions so we be able to use the secret consumers. But they're still busy with a lot of other things, and we wanted to start already with coding and reviewing all the other stuff from the image encryption. And that's what I wanted to outline here in a short way. The image encryption is, yes, about the glance images, and they will be encrypted, but not at glance, but either at the user client or, for example, in Cinder when you're trying to create an image from a volume. So we need the ID of the secret, which we use to encrypt, either Cinder or in the client. And so it's the responsible of the user to take care of the secret, take care of the key to create it and to delete it. And to make it a little bit easier for the user to know whether a secret is used or not used, we discussed a little bit ago with the Barbican team to have the secret consumers, which is just a list of metadata for which is stored for each secret, which a list is it in use and which resource uses it is, which service, for example, glance uses this secret, and yeah, so that will help because at the point where a secret should be deleted, the secret will not be deleted as long as there are still consumers of this secret. This is to help the user. But it is not necessarily, not necessary for the image encryption to work. So we wanted to already start coding and reviewing the part of the image encryption we can do without the secret consumers because it takes a little bit longer than we thought it would be, and we would still be waiting, I don't know for how long. And that's why we have the spec light and glance specs. You can see it and review it there in the Etherpad, where we propose to release the image encryption as experimental feature as long as the secret consumers aren't active. And as soon as the secret consumers will be active, we want to add them to the image encryption. So that's an overview of the work for the last cycle. And there were few discussions at the Glance meeting about this spec-light. Maybe if you have any questions right now is a good time to ask me. Please feel free.
Yeah, I think this is a good idea to because we can at least enable the end-to-end testing, which is going to be really important for this feature because it involves several different services and yeah, basically. So at least we can get it running and verify that everything works without waiting for the secret consumers. Now, from the Cinder part, we've got, I'm trying to remember exactly what work we've got. So you've got to patch up an OS brick. We had a discussion, I don't know, maybe 3 PTGs ago about putting the PGP encryption stuff into OS brick and decided the OS brick library is a good place because all the services that are going to be involved in this all use OS brick. And so it's going to be there. So that's one thing. Is there other work in Cinder that has to get done also?
Yes, we will modify the image from volume path. So if you create a glance image from a volume, this should also be able to encrypt it. And when a volume is created from an encrypted image, we will decrypt it in Cinder on the nose. So yeah, there will be 2 places where patches are needed.
Will the Cinder code also need to use the secret consumer API from Barbican?
Right, eventually when that's available. And I think we can also leverage it for the our current, you know what I'm trying to say. Sorry.
Yep.
Yes, so for our current encryption stuff where we have encryption keys and we have to put one in, we have to put a reference to it in Glance as image metadata to associate it when we've got a Lux encrypted volume. And then also when we're using keys ourselves, I think it'll be at least a little helpful for that. We're in a slightly different place because ours was designed to be, automatic and invisible to the user. But on the other hand, it never hurts to have like an extra check so that they don't delete something that we actually want to use.
Yeah, but I was referring for this work, for example, I think it was mentioned that there are 2 places where Cinder needs to be changed. One is the upload volume to image, and the other is create a volume from image, if I understood correctly.
Yeah, actually, I have a question about that for Josephine. So with the upload volume to image, were you proposing to do encryption on that one also?
Yes, I think it's in the original Cinder spec.
Oh, okay. Because with that one, so
that would be also a point where the secret consumers would be needed.
Yeah, I guess on that one.
Or wait, let me go through it again.
Okay. You may be right, because the thing I'm thinking is, right, this feature seems to be designed for people who don't want to have to trust OpenStack too much, so they can encrypt a volume offline. I mean, volume encrypt an image offline, slap it into Glance. It gets decrypted. Well, I guess it just seems like to have the service do the encryption instead of you do it yourself is a little bit different from the way it's designed. I don't know. How's Nova handling snapshots? So if you create a snapshot of an image that had been encrypted, right? It's no longer encrypted right on the hypervisor. So if you make a snapshot, I guess you just wind up with a regular image. Is that right?
There currently will be Nova patch for the glance image encryption. They wanted to sort out ephemeral storage encryption first.
Oh, okay. So we need to
One thing I also want to mention is when Glance is using Cinder as its backend, we have certain optimizations when we are creating a volume from image and we are uploading. So that code path is different. And we also need to take care of those cases. Like for encrypted images, we should like add it. Yeah, I'm not much aware about the whole thing, but yeah, we need to take those into consideration as well.
What exactly is your concern with Ceph?
No. So Glance could use Cinder as its backend. And when we set that, then when we are creating a volume from an image, there is an optimization. So basically the image is already stored in a Cinder volume, and on the Cinder side, we just do a clone operation on it. And that is a different code path than downloading the whole image and like converting it into the volume. So we also need to take care of that case.
Yes, you're right. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to just check so the image is going to have an encrypted type. I mean, there's going to be a specific, is it the container type or the format? I forget which. There is there is something we could detect on the image, and I guess we'll have to look for that and then not use the optimized path. I guess the other thing is the volume cache. I mean, because do we want these things sitting around in the cache unencrypted? Probably not. All right, that's another, I should put that as a question. All right, thanks, Rashad. Those are good points. Any Other comments or questions? Let me get a link to the spec. I was supposed to move it to yoga. I haven't done that yet. Okay, I think I'm going to take an action item to review this spec again because it's been a while since I looked at it. And maybe Rajat, if you could, since you've been doing a lot of work with the glance Cinder, the Cinder glance store, or however you want to call it, maybe you could take a look to see if there's some, there's anything else that's missing that needs to be addressed. So let me put these on here. Okay. Any questions for Josephine while she's here? And Josephine, you don't happen to have a link to your OS brick patch, do you? Andy, I mean. Not, I think I. Okay, so I just added that the OS brick patch to line 108. Yeah, anyone interested in this, or probably any Cinder core, because you're going to have to review this eventually. Might want to take a look at the spec just to remind yourselves, because it's been a while. It's been this is why Josephine's proposing that this be implemented without the secret consumers API at first, because it's really been holding everything up to the point where I've pretty much forgotten everything we're doing. So we did approve this back in what was before Wallaby? I
think we talked about it in Denver.
Yeah, it's been around for a long time. So it's probably at this point we've been moving it as approved from release to release, but at this point it's aged enough. So I took a to-do item to review this again. It might be a good idea for a few other people to take a look too, just to make sure that we still agree with what's going on, which kind of sucks for Josephine because we had agreed that this was good, but we need to make sure that we still think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like the idea of what's suggesting about using a placeholder for the Barbican missing stuff, so we can review everything, we can merge it, we can maybe have it disabled or by default, whatever, but that the code is there, the vast amount of it, all the different pieces, bricks, Cinder, glance, everything. So at least we can start playing with it and doing something. Otherwise, it's like she said, it's going to take forever.
Yeah, and this way we could, because I think this is a good candidate to get a CI job that goes end to end, to And that would be good because we have that available. It'd be good to have some good testing just to make sure that there are a lot of places where this can break down, I think. Okay, any comments or questions or anything? All right, we reviewed it pretty carefully. So Josephine, we reviewed it pretty carefully back when it was proposed. So I don't think we're going to come up with a bunch of stuff that is going to derail the project. But I do think we need to all remind ourselves exactly what's going on in Cinder for this thing so that we can review better.
Josephine, so you have the OS brick patch ready. You have the Glance spec suggesting to create placeholders. Do we have the Cinder patches as well, or?
Not right now. I could provide them.
Because for me, it's easier to look at the spec, look at the OS brick code, look at the Cinder code and the Glance code, everything at the same time, so I can make sure that I'm thinking about it globally. So once, even if it's a POC of the whole picture is ready with the placeholder, I think it's easier to review that way instead of individual pieces, because in your head, everything is probably very clear, you know, all the pieces. But for example, for me, it will be harder to properly review and test things.
Yeah, I understand.
Thanks.
Thanks, Gorka. All right, any other comments? Okay, thanks, Josephine. And hopefully we'll get this thing pretty much together in yoga. And just a reminder, I mean, take notes in the Etherpad live, but if something occurs to you later and you have a question or a comment, feel free to go back and add it to the Etherpad. And then we usually start each day just saying, does anybody have any, second thoughts or comments from what went on yesterday? So you can point that out if something occurs to you. Okay, next up is, I don't know, is it Mr. Friesex?
Hi, yeah.
I know that's not your
Can you
real
hear me?
name. Yes, we can. So thanks for attending, and I'll let you take over.
Yeah, so the idea is to have application consistency in Snapshot and backup from Cinder. So this is already something that is supported in Nova Snapshot, but it is not in Cinder. So if you take a snapshot or a backup, it will not be a quiesced snapshot or backup, and it will not trigger an FS freeze in the VM. So there is a really old blueprint and spec available. It's from 2014, I believe. So what has been done on this since then? It's well, the Nova side has been done, except that the quiesced endpoints are not exposed for Cinder to be used, and there is no change in Cinder apart from two drivers, which are NetApp and VMware, that support natively quiesced snapshots, so they don't need Nova calls. And yeah, that's about it. I'm not sure if we have to redo the spec again or things like that because it's really old, but it seems kind of accurate nowadays.
When you say, quick question, when you're talking about quiescing for snapshots, are you wanting snapshots that are crash consistent?
Uh, I want to be able to trigger an FS-freeze hooks on the VM and so that people had FS-freeze hooks to make sure their snapshots are consistent for the application. I don't know if that answer.
So it depends what you're trying to achieve. I mean, we've got consistency groups already, okay, which if you snapshot a consistency group will make a crash consistent snapshot of all the volumes within that consistency group.
Yeah,
and if your application can deal with crash consistency, you don't need to quiesce.
Yeah, but like the idea, like if you are using QEMU, the idea is to like it's written in the spec actually to send guest FS-freeze freeze to so that the FS-freeze hooks are executed. So that's application consistency. Like I don't know if you maybe that's a like if your application maybe write I don't know an entry to a DB and write an image so that if you take I don't know Imgur type of services, something like that, and if you imagine that both are on the same volume, you could imagine that the FS-freeze make sure that both entries are in there when you take the snapshot, for instance.
So how do NetApp and VMware deal with this then if they don't use those hooks?
So the storage provider can actually trigger an FS-freeze by himself if they support it, but not every storage provider does it. So yeah, it's done natively, basically. I know there are some work in preparation for the next cycle of Ceph, but it's not something supported through Ceph. It needs some addition to the QEMU driver, I believe, for instance.
So I'm wondering with as far as quiescing Cinder volume snapshots, it's not clear to me if doing it as part of the Cinder snapshot API is really going to get what we want, because that works fine if you only have one Cinder volume attached to an instance. But if you have an instance with more than one Cinder volume, then it might not be very useful, and you might actually need the quiescing to be driven through Nova to snapshot multiple volumes at the same time. I mean, have we thought through how that would work?
Yeah, because quiescing really is down to the application itself. You shouldn't really be quiescing the whole file system on the whole of VM. You would quiesce, for a database example, you would quiesce the database, okay, and then you would take a snapshot and then you would unquiesce the database. You don't quiesce the whole file system.
Well, you might, because one of the proposals for how to do this in the past was to basically do a quiesce of everything and then pause the instance while you do the volume snapshots, which I think is similar to what VMware usually does on their BERT platforms.
It seems a pretty large hammer to hit a very small tack. to quiesce the whole VM just to take a snapshot. I mean, that's why we created consistency groups in the first place, so that we have consistent snapshots. And you put the databases, for example, you would have your database volume and your log volume on 2 different volumes, but they quiesce at the same day. They don't need to quiesce because they have consistent snapshots. They have a crash consistency.
Yeah, but that doesn't provide the same thing. I mean, the point of quiescing is that you drive everything from the application and the file system to be in a stable, like ready to recover state that's better than just crash consistency. The consistency group stuff only gives you crash consistency still.
Which most applications these days can actually are designed to deal with.
But most is not all, and there are still people wanting to do the other one.
Well, yeah, and
it's inconsistent.
It's about having a lower RTO as part of this, for even if they can recover from just crash consistent stuff. If you've quiesced everything, it'll spin back up quicker and with less recovery process and that kind of thing.
But I agree with Eric that we should look at it as a whole. For example, we have generic groups now. So if we add volumes to a generic group, and that is on a backend that doesn't support consistent snapshot, then we would want to use it. We would have to consider this feature as well in there. And for volumes, and like Eric says, what if we want to do it in a specific Nova instance that has volumes, and those volumes don't belong to any group or consistency group or anything? We will still want to do them all simultaneously. So maybe Cinder is not the right entry point for the call, for the request, or at least not for all requests. And we also have to consider that other scenario. So there seems to be at least 3 scenarios that we must look into.
Yeah, I don't like it. I don't like the idea of quiescing a VM if you've got multiple volumes that are not in a consistency group, whether it's a generic volume group or a consistency group, and then have to manually go and snap each one of those volumes and then come back and unquiesce it again. That sounds very clunky to me and fraught with risk.
Just to add something, I don't believe that libvirt has a command to just freeze a single volume. I think it's only freeze the single VM. So I guess that we would have to quiesce the instance, do all the snapshot at once, and then unfreeze it or tow it.
Yep. The thing is that we may be looking at a single use case, but there can be different use cases. Somebody may want to QS in a snapshot all the volumes from the VM, but maybe they only want to do 1 or 2. So probably the feature should consider the different scenario, at least consider them. We may discard them and say we don't support this, but we should look into whether we want to do them or not.
I mean, to me, this feels more like a Nova thing. You would tell Nova to quiesce, then you go and do your Cinder snapshots, then you go tell Nova to unquiesce. I'm not sure why it would need to come through Cinder.
I think Nova has something pretty close to that already for instant snapshots, but I forget.
Yeah, they support it for Nova snapshot. But yeah, the idea is just to call the Nova endpoint when we do a snapshot, basically. But yeah, there are, maybe if we do a snapshot of a consistent group and all the volumes are attached to the same VM, we can like quiesce one time as an optimization or something like that, I guess.
I mean, that wouldn't even be a consistency group thing. That would apply to a generic group too, I would think, since it's not a back-end driven snapshot feature.
Yeah, that would be generic. I'm not too aware of consistency group and generic group, but yeah.
Well, just to give you an idea, consistency group is where you tell the backend, your array, do a snapshot of this consistency group, and the backend makes sure that it creates a snapshot of all the volumes belonging to that consistency group simultaneously. Whereas a generic group in Cinder is basically a grouping of normal volumes where you can perform an operation, but this operation is done serially. So if you do a snapshot, a generic group in Cinder, do the snapshot first one volume, then another, and so on. So whereas in the backend, if it's consistency group, they are all snapshot at the exactly same moment. That is mostly the difference.
Yeah, but we're mixing up things here a little bit. So if you're going to implement something to quiesce and pause the instance to do a snap for a consistency group, you might as well use the same thing for a generic volume group if you're creating a group snapshot, because the concept is the same. It's
exactly.
It's orthogonal to the fact that it's a consistency group. It's really just the fact that it's a group at all would mean that you would want to do it for consistency groups or just plain groups.
But it sounds like we need an updated spec for this proposal.
Yeah, I think that'd be really good. I mean, this is something that people have talked about developing more in this area for many years, and we've just never really gone through with doing a whole lot. But I think it would be a really useful thing to go after.
All right, I think it'd probably be helpful if we could add some points into the Etherpad for Mr. Frieseks to, sorry, I forgot your real name, to address. Gorka, you mentioned there like at least 3 use cases that we need to consider. Maybe we can put some points in here to help out.
I think mostly is those. You do it for a single volume. You do all the volumes in the VM, belong to the same group or are independent, and finally all the volumes in a group, which can be from different VMs. We don't need to address them all. We just need to consider them all. For example, the last one, they may belong to different instances, so it may be a lot more complicated, and we may just decide, okay, that is not supported. And for me, that is fine, as long as we are aware of our decision and we document it, it's fine.
You're also going to have to think about what happens when you're using multi-attach, because it will make some of this not work the same way.
True. Thanks.
Okay, I see.
And while the spec may have to consider all the cases and how we are going to address them, then we can have incremental patches to add specific parts of the global. So maybe the easiest one is the single volume, and we can start with that, and then move on to the other ones instead of trying to create a patch that implements everything, and it's complicated to review and to code and everything.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if more or less it's clear what we would like to see, or if we just made things less clear.
From my point of view, I think it's okay. There's just this consistency group thing that I didn't know, or so yeah, I should think about that in the spec. But yeah, for the rest of the use case, I don't know. Maybe we don't want to support such a thing, but okay.
Yeah, and if we don't support them, we have to implement the checking code in Cinder to give a proper failure. For example, if you try to do it in a multi-attach volume, then you would fail and say, hey, this is not supported for multi-attach volumes. But we don't want to silently fail, give just an exception in the logs or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. This makes sense.
Okay, any other comments? All right, so the community is generally supportive of this, but we just need to see some more details. Make sure we have this thought through. Thanks. Again, if anything occurs to you later, come back to the Etherpad and leave some notes, and that'll be helpful. Okay, and then Mr. Friesak's, right, if you need help as you're developing the spec, just put an item on the weekly meeting agenda, and you can always ask for some help in a weekly meeting or something.
Okay, sure. Thanks.
And if it's more convenient, we have a video meeting as well, monthly, if I remember correctly, and maybe it's easier for you to have the discussion face to face instead of IRC.
No,
whatever
that should
works.
be fine.
Yeah,
I already. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
I already did once an IRC meeting for another feature, so that should be fine.
Okay, great. Yeah, so the last meeting of every month is held in video. So.
Okay.
Great. All right, thanks. All right, so we're slightly early, which is good. Rajat, you're up next with the default types retrospective.
Yeah, hi. So I would just like to share my screen.
Okay, sure.
From my different regions. I just prepared a presentation for this.
Now, do I have to, you'd think I would know, but I guess I have to stop sharing, right? So
No, I think he can kick you out.
Oh, okay.
If you haven't locked it, you can lock it, but if you don't,
oh, okay.
The next
I haven't locked
presenter
anything, so okay, let's see what happens. Go ahead and share, Rajat.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Just give me 1 second.
Sure.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so previously this topic had a different name regarding the underscore default type, but I thought it would be a good idea to change this to the retrospective. Like we can go through what all happened, what all problems we had. So like the main motivation for this topic was this default type underscore default was confusing to everyone. Some operators complained that as an upstream bug, some end users complained that to their operators, and so on. So basically, this was the major idea of adding this topic. So I will just briefly go through all the things and changes we have done on this area. So our initial problem was basically based on untyped volumes. So the main problem is that some of the code areas assume volume 2 already have a type. And in those areas, we had some issues, some failing cases there. And also a volume is not very useful without a volume type because we don't have any backend specific properties for it, or like some things like multi-attached application or availability zones. So like it kinds of makes the volume a little useless in case of a real life scenario. So I did a little bit, I tried to do a little bit of research. Why do we have untyped volumes? I could just find one patch in Nova saying that this is the initial cut of volume type APIs and this is the commit. Nothing else in the commit message or anything. And I also found out the fork of Cinder from Nova, and there also none of the information was available. I had a little bit of discussion with Gorka also regarding this. So mostly it seems to be the backward compatibility issue. Like initially we had untyped volumes in Nova, and we carried on to support that till now. Like we just to support the backward to keep the backward compatibility, we are just allowing the code to just work with untyped volumes and with types also. So yeah, so the initial solution which we came up with in train release, I implemented this art of creating a underscore default type. The naming is very like very strange because we wanted to keep a name that wouldn't collide with any existing volume type name. So in Cinder we have volume types and all should have the same, all should have different names, like they have different IDs. So like this was the idea of this name. And so basically we created this default type during a database migration, and whenever a volume is created without specifying a volume type, then it would be assigned this default type. So we also had the default volume type configuration parameter in cinder.conf, but that was optional. So some deployments didn't set it, and hence like there were still untyped volumes. So we created this, and we enforced that any volume created without a type will be assigned the default type. And also all untyped volumes will be migrated to this default type. That was a part of that feature then. And the problems that recently occurred, like recently I've seen a lot of people complaining about it, that default, this is a very confusing name because some deployments use a different default, and the end users are very confused. Like we should prefer a type, like in O we have the O type over this default because this is more pleasing to see. Like this signifies majorly what the default is. And the following problem with this was that they were unable to delete this underscore default type because this type is enforcing a deployment to not create untyped volumes. So then we did some improvements over that, and we added this code to have different enforcement. So we had this default volume type parameter, which we used for these improvements. So basically, we are able to delete the default type, but there are certain conditions that needs to be followed. Like there should always be one volume type in the whole deployment, and that should be the value of the default volume type config parameter in cinder.conf. Both should point to the same thing. The default value is still set to __ default to have the compatibility as we had before. And we can't delete any volume type that is set as default volume type in the cinder.conf. So basically, if these conditions are met, you can obviously delete this __ default type. And if anything fails, then we are not able to create volumes. Like there is some code there also. So there were some proposed solution, but there was discussion around it as well. Like we could delete this __ default type where in which deployments it is not being used. They have a different default type and none of the volumes are using this type. We could add a database. So there are two parts to it. We could delete it on the Cinder side. We could delete it on the deployment side, like the deployment tool which is used to basically. So on the Cinder side, the solution is like this, like none of the volume should be using this type, and the default volume type config parameter should point to a different volume type there. And on the deployment tool side, we could have a bunch of possible solutions. And would like to discuss on the same slide, but would I like to add recommendations just to finish it off. So this was one recommendation there, because people were getting confused which is our default type exactly. We have the type default command. I think Golka pointed out somewhere, like this is a very useful command we could use to find out which is our default type rather than relying on the name of it, like the __ default thing. We also have the support for project specific defaults that could also be very helpful if they are getting confused, and they could use a project specific default. Like this is the hierarchy where we have currently right now. We have a new API where we can assign a default volume type per project, and that takes priority over the default volume type config parameter, and that takes priority over the __ default. So yeah, that's around it, like the whole story of what all happened with these default volume type things. I will just stop sharing and just want to discuss on this, like are people facing this problem and what are the solutions in their mind to overcome this confusion. Yeah.
Thanks, Rayat. I would like to mention about the get default type that we have somehow to make sure that this is kind of highlighted. As in, if you're a user, this is how you know what your default type is. Because like you were saying, Rayat, we have a hierarchy now. You can get an administrator can create a default per project default volume type. So any naming is useless, even if they have their own default name or anything. The names of the types, even if they are useful and they must be meaningful and whatever, in the end, they have to use that command to know what their default is, because it can be a bunch of things. So I think that, I don't know if we are doing a good job at highlighting that. I will look at our docs and see if we can make it kind of very clear, involved, or whatever, that this is how they should look at their default.
Yeah, we may need to, so we should look at the API. I don't know how many people, I use the API reference. I don't know if anybody else actually does, but we can, I think there's a section there that's just about volumes. So we should probably put a notice up in there. We should probably do the API reference in general, but because we do mention the, right, the get. So it's basically the regular get for a volume type, except you use default as the name of the volume type, and then it tells you what the effective one is. No, that's not true. There's some command. So
yeah, there's an API request.
Yeah, we need to make it, so we need to just promote it somehow. So I think one thing would be mention it clearly up in the volume create, which is probably where people would look first for how do I create a volume. So let's start putting notes in here. All right, so yeah, and I think the big problem with this has been we tried to come up with a name that wouldn't clash with anybody and would also be clear as to what this thing was for. But I guess when users do a volume list and see default, a lot of people are specifically asking for that volume type, even if the operator has set an actual default type that everybody should be using. And you can see how that would appeal to people, even though we hadn't quite anticipated that.
Well, this is why we should have a default volume type per tenant.
We do.
Do we?
Yep.
Is that
That's
Yeah.
what you get when you make the call to get default type. That's the idea. You get yours. And if you have a one per tenant, that's the one you get. If you don't have it, and there's something configured in cinder.conf, that's the one you get. And if that one is not even configured, you get the __ default.
Okay. Got you.
So yeah, we have a hierarchy, and now it's harder to know what is your default.
Yeah, so the documentation does need to be updated for all of that. Because that's not clear.
I think the docs were updated. The problem is where. For example, Brian is not saying this should be in the create volume because that's where people go to look at it. So, and maybe the create volume, the type list, and maybe we even have to update the listing with a new micro version, the listing of types, so that you get your default type as well. Somehow marked, this is your default, and the Cinder client actually highlights it like, hey, this is yours, or something like that. I don't know. But the documentation, upgrading the reference in the create section seems like a good start.
Yeah, I really like Gorka's idea to do that in the volume list because that's where people mostly get confused saying this type. So that is a good thing if you could implement.
Yeah, and I guess if we somehow do this, then Horizon could also, do some kind of highlighting, so that you see what your default type is going to be.
Yeah, or maybe one of the problems, if I remember correctly, was that when they were I don't know if they were already doing it. When you go to create a new volume, they had implemented that you forcefully have to select a volume type. So they should immediately jump to the default one. And I believe that they even may be doing it. Like they make the call to the get default type and then select it. Maybe they are doing already.
Okay. That would be cool.
And the other topic Jack wanted to discuss is where we should do the removal of the default type. In my opinion, it should be something that the deployment tool should take care of. Because the idea, from my perspective, is that you install Cinder, you run it the first time, and there is no default type. The configuration will not have a default type. Why not? Because if you haven't run Cinder, you could not have created a default type. So Cinder, the first time it starts, will not have a default in the .conf. And if it has one, it is wrong because it doesn't exist. And so it should always have the __ default. And it's only after the installer or the operator creates the default type and changes the .conf file, that we can remove the underscore delete default. So I think it should be the operator that after it has done the different steps removes the default, instead of Cinder doing it on a migration or on a startup or anywhere else.
Right. So we should make this part of the installation docs or something. That.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is basically improved documentation again.
That's a good clarification.
I don't know if everybody agrees that this is responsibility of the operator deployment tool, or if they think Cinder should be smarter about it.
Sorry, could you say it again? I was typing and my keyboard's really loud.
Yeah, I would like to see what people think, if they agree that this is a deployer operator responsibility, or if Cinder should be smarter and do everything the best it can.
My intuition is to agree that it's a deployer responsibility. Mainly because if the default, the underscore default type gets used, so if somebody creates a volume before the operator is able to make the changes, then you can't delete it. And I don't know if Cinder, I think there'd be problems if we tried to migrate any volumes of that type to whatever the configured default type was, because if the configured default type has some kind of special backend or something, well, the default type though is like super generic, right? I think all it has is the name and its ID, right? I don't think it has any other properties.
It doesn't, but there's no guarantee that an operator hasn't begun to add some properties to that one.
Well, that's true, because you can update it, right? So that's
okay. Right.
Yeah, that was the problem we ran into before with this discussion.
Yeah, and since we don't have any control over the order in which stuff happens, anything could happen. I guess, I don't know. So we need to build some artificial intelligence or machine learning into Cinder, obviously.
Or we kick it to another project. That's another option.
the default type project.
No, I meant the problem. We kick it to another project, the installer.
Oh, I see.
The deployment tool. It's your problem.
We can give
Now,
you a big list
seriously.
of things to address.
No, in my case, it was not the reason why I think it's a deployer tool issue. Is not because it is more code in Cinder, but because I think it's harder for Cinder to know what the operator or the installer tool actually wants.
Right, because the installer tool will have a specific order of operations by which it will do stuff. And so it knows what it can and can't do, whereas we can't anticipate all that. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, anyone else have?
Also, basically, I just want a general idea, like everyone has been seeing this type. It's been there since train. So everyone might have seen this somewhere in their deployment. So is it really a problem? Like I have seen instances of upstream bugs getting reported regarding this, and we don't want this type. But is it really a problem for everyone or just a few people?
Well, probably just to some people. It depends on how people are using the deployment. For new installation, probably this is a problem. If somebody has already been using their deployment for 2 years, they don't even bother checking the new volume types. They assume they're the same they've always been, and they don't go and do a list. So I think it probably is a problem, but only on specific cases.
And I think
Yeah.
at one point we had discussed like hiding this thing in the volume list response, but I think it's better to make a decision and just get rid of it when you're ready. But that is another possibility. I don't know, I guess, yeah.
The hiding is tricky because when do you hide it? When you don't have volumes using it? And then it's something that then you, or when you have a different .com file pointing somewhere else, but then you can have files, volumes that are already using it. So you start making your, the case where you hide it more and more complex. And then operators needs to actually know when it will be hidden and when it will be shown.
Yeah.
It's easier. If it's there, I show it to you. You don't like it, delete it.
Yeah, I think that's, I'm thinking we didn't, so other than the initial bugs that you could not delete the default type, I don't think we've heard much about it since we made the change. So I guess people are just.
I think we have some customer cases complaining like, I'd rather this not be there.
Yeah.
And yeah, sure. And we've told them now you can delete it, and they say okay, fine, but it should not be there. And you know that, for example, Tom Barron has a strong opinion that these should not be there when Triplo does a deployment. And it makes sense from a deployment point of view.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to agree that this is a deployment responsibility. So.
And for the deployment, it should not be too hard because there is a step where it creates the default volume type and it knows that it's in Cinder.conf. So immediately before anybody can use it, because the deployment has not been completed, it can delete it. So it's probably safest to be there.
Hey, Rajat, have you gotten what you need?
Yeah, so as Gorka pointed out, this idea of showing the default, I think hiding the default type, like this is a better solution than hiding the default type. Like I think Glance, when returning the stores info, like it has multiple backends configured, it shows like which is the default. It's mentioned there. So it would like, this is very convenient. We could add a column on the Cinder find response where it should show like which one is the default there. And I agree that we need some documentation around it, which I have been lacking in some of the work. But yeah, I think I have a pretty decent idea of how to follow up with this.
Okay, great. All right. Again, if you have any second thoughts or suggestions for Jot, please feel free to add them to the Etherpad later. And
a reminder for those that join later, at the beginning of on line 50 of the Etherpad, there is a list of attendees, and I think we have been asked for people to write their names there if possible.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder. Because we're showing 25 people connected to Blue Jeans right now, and I don't see 25 names. So please feel free to add them. Also, it helps us when you put your comments in. We know what color it is from this little chart. But still, please add your IRC nick if you remember, because some of the colors are close together, and it'll be easier to tell who's who later. Okay. All right, what's up next is the driver support matrix update. But I think we could probably use a break. Well, let me put it this way. I could use a break. So what do you say? I guess 10 minutes, or should we just start? This is scheduled to start at 1500. Should we just start up again at 1500? Okay. I'm going to stop.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. And then somebody please remind me to restart it when we start again later. Okay, so see everybody back here at 1500. Thanks.
All right. See ya.
Thank you.